Over the years, a lot of you have been asking for some type of guide on using spices at home. And to be honest, I've been a little hesitant just because I'm not an expert myself. I use a lot of spices in my dishes, but I don't feel like I'm a true pro. But luckily for you, I met a pro the other day, and he's got a company called Burlap and Barrel, and they are completely revolutionizing the spice game. So he's gonna come over and stock up my new kitchen with spices, and he's also gonna teach you every technique for using spices at home. And we're gonna cook up some really tasty food, but first, of course, I need to build a spice rack for all of these new spices. So when I was constructing the space, there was a wall that I left open that I knew would be the perfect place for a spice rack, really close to the kitchen, but still a ton of room to display all of my spices. So Alex and I worked on a pretty cool design for a spice rack that not only included the spices, but also a place to hang my aprons. So I just sent that design over to my dad, and he pretty much just real life 3D printed it. And a few days later, he was bringing it up to the studio. There was already so much wood in the studio that I felt like I needed a pop of color. So I decided to paint this spice rack. So all I needed to do was 1 coat of primer, and then I did 3 coats of this nice sort of ocean blue indigo color, I guess you could call it. Then I hung it up on the wall, and I had a little magnetic strip that I installed with some magnetic hooks to hold up my aprons. So here you go, this is the spice rack. It came out great. It's one of the last things I needed to install in the studio. This section was built custom for these 8-ounce jars right here. This is gonna be the main spices. And then I added this shelf right here for some bigger items, maybe like a matcha ball. I'm not really sure what I'm gonna put there. I've got this little shelf up here for some extra storage. Alex had a great idea to add this little section for a flower pot, which I just think is awesome design. And then here are the hooks for my aprons that really brings this whole design together. And you can see I've got some spices here. We're starting the collection, but I'm hoping by the end of the day that this thing is fully stocked with some Burlap and Barrel spices. Hello, Ethan.
Hey, how are you?
Good, thanks for coming by, dude. So you are the chef and co-owner, co-creator of this right here.
All of the above, yeah.
Okay.
Burlap
and
and Barrel. So we're a single origin spice company, and I brought a whole bunch of our single origin spices. We're cooking some Turkish food today, so I brought particularly some Turkish spices, but I also brought a whole bunch of other random stuff.
So you're gonna help me stock. You see my new spice rack?
Oh wow, nice.
Not bad, right?
Yeah.
So my question to you is, why spices?
Yeah, good question. They're just a completely undervalued and overlooked part of the kitchen. They're agricultural products. They come from farms. They're grown by farmers, but we don't think about them like that. Cinnamon, you know, everybody loves cinnamon, but how many people actually know how it grows? So this felt like an area of food and of food supply chains. Having worked in kitchens myself, this was an area that was not, you know, people were not getting as much flavor as they could have been, and so we decided to solve that.
So what was your path before spices? How did you actually get into the spice game?
Yeah, so I had been a chef. I worked in restaurants here in New York. I cooked in London for a little bit. I had an ice cream company, but then left kitchens to go to graduate school for international development. I was an aid worker. I lived in Afghanistan for a long time.
Speaking of,
there it is. This is kind of the first spice that we started importing, wild cumin from Afghanistan, something that I had come across when I lived there.
So is your international sort of studies and international work that really led you into the spice game in a way?
Yeah, very much. I started coming across really interesting ingredients I hadn't tasted before, and I started bringing them back and sharing them with friends in the industry, and here we are several years later to go from, you know, smuggling wild cumin in duffel bags to actually importing it legally and having a company.
When you taste a spice from Burlap and Barrel, is it a completely new experience? Is it just a level up from what you're probably used to?
It should be. I mean, the thing that people tell us a lot is like, you know, I never knew this is what cumin was supposed to taste like. I never knew this is what cinnamon was supposed to taste like. Because we've just become accustomed to the bland supermarket versions, and actually they should taste a whole lot better than that.
So today our goal is to create a video
Yeah.
where we basically you, because you're the spice expert, show off every technique for using spices in one dish.
We're gonna try.
Okay,
Yeah.
awesome. I just wanted to quickly go over storing of spices.
Yeah.
Because I get a lot of questions on this.
Me too.
You too. Okay,
Yeah.
so what's the rundown? What do you need to be looking out for?
So the thing is, spices take a really long time to get from the farm to the supermarket,
Yeah.
sometimes several years. So the way that you store it for the last 6 months of its existence doesn't matter a whole lot.
Yeah.
You know, some people like to keep them in the fridge, which I don't recommend because it builds condensation in and out. People get very worked up about spices out of the light, away from the heat. I think the most important thing to do is to put them in a place that you'll use them and use them regularly.
Okay.
The point is not to store them, it's to cook with them.
Yeah.
So
as far as like timeline on when you would want to use these.
I think generally a good rule of thumb is within a year of buying it, but ideally they're not getting better with age, right? So the faster the better. And when you're buying spices at the supermarket, look on the jar for a manufacturing date. That'll tell you when it was put in the jar, so you want to buy as close to that date as possible.
The number one thing is store them where you use them,
Yeah.
but as far as light, as far as heat, what would you say?
Away from light and away from heat ideally, but if
Yeah.
that means you're gonna stick them in a cabinet and forget that they're there, then don't do that, right? Like put them in a place
And
where
that's
you'll
the
use them.
idea of like this spice rack for me. When I was building it, you know, it's a display.
Yeah.
It's really putting these spices where I'm gonna be inspired by them, where I'm gonna be using them right by the kitchen.
And if having them open means you wander by and go, oh, you know, I haven't cooked with cardamom in a while, let me try that. I think that makes up for all the damage
I
that
like
you've
the
done.
clear bottles
Yeah.
because, you know, I can see things. I'm very visual. I'm not just gonna read, especially because look at the colors here. Look at the different types of grinds, and there's so much variety. And for me, you got to see that.
Yeah, for sure.
So, what technique is this?
So we're toasting spices. We're doing a blend of coriander, cumin, black pepper, and allspice. This is a kind of a classic base blend for Turkish food, which is what we're cooking today. And toasting really brings out the oil in the spices, especially if the spices are old or stale, which mine are not, but others are. This brings some of those oils that have receded back up to the surface.
And when you're toasting spices, does it matter if you do it individually or?
As long as you're working with spices that are approximately the same size, you can do them all together. If we were toasting something like cinnamon sticks or star anise, I would do those separately. Those are going to take longer, and you risk burning the smaller spices.
And just low heat all the way?
Low heat and move them around, and you're really waiting for that fragrance to fill the room. That's how you know when they're ready.
Okay. So we've toasted our spices, what's next?
We've toasted the spices. We're gonna do 2 different grinding techniques. One, an electric grinder to get a really fine powder that's gonna go into both the rice and the meat that we're making. And we're gonna do a mortar and pestle grind to have some texture, and that's gonna go on the veggies, the grilled veggies that we're gonna make.
So if you want the powder, you gotta use the
If you want the powder, yeah, you gotta use an electric grinder and a blade grinder, ideally. Some people use burr grinders, which are really designed for coffee, but since we're dealing with different sizes and shapes, you gotta use a blade grinder.
And then what do you like using the mortar and pestle for?
When I want texture, when I want a little crunch of spice on the outside of whatever I'm cooking, mortar and pestle is perfect. You can obviously get a fine grind, but it takes a lot of work, and it's never gonna be as uniform as a blade grinder.
Okay, what are we doing next?
So this is the blending stage. We made a base blend, coriander, black pepper, cumin, and allspice, which we ground up in the grinder. And then we're adding other spices to that to make 2 different blends. One which is gonna be for the rice, and the other one which is gonna be for the meat.
So what'd you do for the rice?
So for the rice, we took whole cardamom pods and ground them in the grinder to make a really smooth, really fine powder, and just mixed that in with some of the base blend that we made.
And then for the meat, what was the blend?
So for the meat, we took the base blend, added some chili, some black lime, and a little bit of cinnamon as well as salt, and that's gonna go in with the ground meat, and that's gonna marinate the meat before we cook it.
And then for beginners out there, like how do you create a blend? Is it just
Yeah.
your wildest imaginations?
You know, a blend is as simple as 2 spices mixed together. If you like cinnamon and you like cardamom, mix them together, and that's a blend. We're sort of stuck in this idea that certain spices are sweet and certain spices are savory, and I really encourage people to get away from that. If you like cinnamon, put cinnamon in meat, put cinnamon on grilled veggies, try it on different things and see what you like.
So experimentation and blending is key.
Exactly.
So we've got our ground spices. What's next?
So we've got our ground spices. We're adding them into the ground meat along with some olive oil, and we're gonna let this marinate. This is the marination step. And the meat is gonna absorb all the flavor from those spices. Ideally, this would be overnight, but you can do it for a few hours or 20 minutes. It really doesn't matter. The longer, the better. And this is really where all the flavors come together.
And what are we making today with the meat?
We're making kofta, which are gonna be little ground meat patties. We're using lamb with a bunch of spices, and we're just gonna pan sear them. We're gonna grill them in a pan.
Moving on to the rice, what spice technique are we using?
So we're doing a sort of Afghan-inspired rice dish. This isn't super traditional, but an expedited version of my mother-in-law's recipe. Starting with carrots and raisins, which are classic in Kabuli pulao. We're gonna soften the carrots and raisins a little bit. Then we're gonna add a spice mix into the hot oil, and that's a technique called tempering. We're just gonna infuse the oil with spices, and then the rice is gonna go in on top of it. And so the rice, as it cooks, is gonna soak up all of the delicious flavor from the carrots, raisins, and spices.
So when you're tempering, you're actually cooking the spice.
Yep.
And what does that do to the spice?
Cooking the spice at a low heat in oil is really more about the oil than it is about the spice. It's about distributing that flavor into the oil so that it gets into every single grain of rice.
Got it. So it's like the ultimate infusion into your rice.
Exactly.
So after the oil is tempered, then what happens to the rice?
Then we're gonna add the rice. We're gonna cook the rice in the oil first without any water before we add the water. And that's gonna help coat each grain of rice with oil. So as the rice cooks in the water, which we'll add after, the rice it doesn't get sticky. They stay kind of discrete little grains. So we just added the water, just kind of eyeballing the quantities, but we want to cook the rice and we want it to be a little on the dry side so that it stays a little al dente, a little crunch. And we're gonna turn the heat up pretty high and let it come to a boil, and then drop the heat down as low as we can. Just let it simmer.
So this is a genius technique. Tell me about this.
So this is a Persian style of cooking rice, where normally you would put the cover on the rice and the water would drip back down in, but we want a kind of a dry texture to the rice, and so putting the towel around the lid soaks up the moisture as it evaporates, as the rice steams. You get more of a steamed texture. Again, those discrete individual little grains of rice. There are a lot of ways to use this. If you wanted to get a crunchy bottom on the rice, which we're not doing today, this would be part of the technique to get that.
All right, so how are we gonna treat these veggies?
So we are slicing up some zucchini and then rubbing them with the spice blend that we made in the mortar and pestle. So we're just rubbing them with salt, sumac, mint, and coriander. It's gonna be a really kind of fresh, tart, citrusy flavor profile, and that combination, sumac, mint, is also really classically Turkish. And then we're gonna saute them in a little olive oil.
So for sauteing, what are we looking for when we're sauteing these veggies?
So we're putting them flat down into the pan, so there's a lot of surface area. They're gonna brown a little bit. We do wanna be careful that we don't burn the sumac especially because it has some sugar in it. It's a fruit. So we want a fair amount of oil to prevent that from happening, and then we just want to keep an eye on these. Let them sit in the oil on one side long enough to get some browning.
And do you think we can do the meat right in there?
Yeah. So this is the lamb kofta, little lamb patties that we mix with spices, and then we're just kind of grilling them. And this is going to be sort of the centerpiece of the meal. We're just looking for a little crust, a little browning on the edges, and then they'll be done.
You're just going to keep flipping them, it looks like?
Yeah, I want to make sure they cook through. Yeah, we don't want them to be overcooked. We still want it to be pretty juicy. I think these are ready to come out.
Okay, let's get rid of them. So what's our next spice technique?
We're doing an oil infusion. We're infusing a little olive oil with Urfa chili, which is a black chili, a cured chili from Turkey. It's really malty, really savory, a little bit sweet and a little bit spicy. We're gonna pour it over some yogurt, and that's gonna be one of the side dishes around the meat.
When else would you use an infused oil?
An infused oil is really versatile. You could infuse garlic in oil, you could infuse fresh herbs, you can make it ahead of time and put it in a jar and pour it over pizza, use it to cook other dishes. It's just a very versatile technique and used in all kinds of cuisines all around the world. We've got some flatbreads, and we're just gonna cook them in the oil that we used to make the kofta.
What's our technique for the flatbreads?
The flatbread we're gonna finish with a bunch of fresh spices. We'll cook them on one side and flip them over, and then make our own za'atar blend with sesame seeds, thyme, and sumac.
When you're finishing with spices, what's your goal there?
Getting some of that fresh flavor, but also some spices that there's a little bit of a risk of burning or something like that. You want them on just at the very end. If we were to put them on earlier, the risk would be that they would burn in the pan. So we're gonna do a little hibiscus infusion into alcohol.
So this is an infusion.
This is an infusion. We're gonna crush the hibiscus a little bit. We don't have a ton of time now, so I just want a little more surface area, so I'm just gonna...
So quicker infusion.
More surface area, right. So we're gonna use the mortar and pestle, break up the hibiscus flower petals. So then we're gonna just put a little bit of this into the bottom of a jar. We're only looking to make, a few shots of this. Add the tequila. The longer the better, but I think we'll start seeing some color in the alcohol in the next half hour. We're making a simple syrup, cardamom infused simple syrup, which we're going to use to sweeten the cocktail. So we'll get some tartness from the hibiscus and a lightness, a brightness from the cardamom and a little soda, and it's going to be delicious.
So take us through the drink real quick.
All right, so we're going to take a glass, put a salt and black lime rim on the glass. Then we're going to mix our simple syrup, our cardamom simple syrup, our hibiscus tequila, and a little bit of soda water and a little bit of lime juice, and pour it over some ice in this glass, and there's going to be a lot going on, but it's going to be delicious.
Dude.
Nice.
Forks, drinks, insane. So how many techniques in this?
Like 100.
I think we had 10, right?
I think we had 10.
When we were first discussing what meal we wanted to do, it was either between some type of Middle Eastern dish or an Indian dish. But I've done a lot of Indian on this channel, so it was cool to shift it in this direction. Because both of those cuisines, I feel like, they're the spice masters,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, for sure.
So what's your ultimate goal with Burlap and Barrel?
I think the most important thing is that people understand more about their supply chain behind the spices that they use. We don't realize generally that spices come from farms, are agricultural products. So all of the same things that matter for coffee, for apples, for all kinds of other agricultural products matter for spices. And helping people draw that connection, tasting something that's unlike any other cumin or any other cinnamon they've tasted before, but then also setting up farmers to be able to make more money from something that they're growing and to have direct access to a market.
So it's not just about selling your product, it's also an education.
Yeah.
Because for me, you certainly educated me. Just like any food process or product, you start off with like, oh, I'll just go to the supermarket and that's fine. And then you start getting into it and it's like there's a point of no return. Mm-hmm. You sent me on that point of no return with spices, because now I just need the good stuff.
Yeah.
I need that high quality stuff, and you guys are doing such a good job bringing the high quality products. So where can people find you?
Our website is burlapandbarrel.com. We have a whole selection of spices on our website. We're on Instagram at burlapandbarrel. And we're a small company, it's just two of us. So if you DM me on Instagram, it's me. I'm the one responding to those messages.
Yeah.
If you send us an email through our website, it's Ori, my co-founder, who's going to be responding to that email. So we're here. We're working on it.
Well, good luck, fighting the spice battle. Thanks for coming on and teaching these people a little more about spices. I hope you guys learned a few things.
Thanks for having me.